Hi, I'm Jim Weedman, and I've created a system security plan that you can share and reproduce in anything. You can see on the first page how I'd like to be credited if you use it for someplace, but you can use it just about any place you want. So let me start with why I did this in the first place. What on earth possessed me to create something this odd and unusual? So I work in the security field, and I have had colleagues in the past ask for examples of system security plans. They need to write one, they need to understand how it works, and sometimes I can share what I have, but frequently I can't. They tend to be sensitive documents, and people get worried about sharing them. So that's been kind of frustrating. It's difficult to then have conversations with the right people around what makes a good security plan, what doesn't, advantages and disadvantages, and all of that kind of stuff. So I needed a safe, shareable example to help guide others. And I've been looking for that for a while. In 2012, we're going way back here, the White House had, the president's White House had a petition site. Citizens could go and suggest things that the government ought to do, and if it got enough votes, then it would get a response. So someone came in, someone by the name of, going by the initials JD, proposed that the federal government create a Death Star, and it would create lots of jobs and do all of that kind of stuff. Paul Shawcross was the chief of the Science and Space Branch at the White House Office of Management and Budget. Quite a title. So Paul wrote the response for the White House on this. It got enough votes. They promised that they would do this, so they responded to it, and it's a really clever response. But that got me thinking, what would a security plan look like for the Death Star? Isn't that my perfect example of something that can be shared? All right, so let's talk about what's in the plan. Now that we've talked about how it's created, let's talk about what's in the plan. It's based on the NIST special publication 800-18 Rev 1 on how to create a security plan. I used the template from Appendix A in it. And then the controls are from NIST 800-53 Rev 5, current as of this video creation. So that's where I got the information for this, and then structured the security plan around that information. So let's look at some of what's there, and you can see if you get to the straight, there's a title page, there's some licensing information and some warnings. Do not copy and paste. Do not copy and paste this into a real security plan. You will be sorry. But you can see the table of contents, how I laid this out. I took a little bit of creative license with the outline, but I tried to follow the NIST template suggestion pretty closely. And then you can get into the controls, and that's the bulk of the security plan. So I based this on the FISMA moderate baseline, just because that's a standard. You can always go up for high or down for low, but it gives you a reasonable look at least how I would design a security plan. So then if we get into, and I'm going to pick RA5 just because I know that it has all the things that I want to show you in it, vulnerability and monitoring. For each control, I listed who's the control owner, who's the person responsible for making sure this control is what it's supposed to be and is getting done and all that kind of good stuff. What's the control implementation status? Is it fully implemented? Is it partially implemented? Is it planned? That kind of thing, right? So, and then we get into the control text. The control text is straight out of 800-53 Rev 5. But I've updated, and you'll see I've left the brackets in for the organizationally defined values. The next section is the control implementation description. This is the meat of each of these controls. This is how the Death Star security organization is implementing the control and describes what they're using to meet the control. And so you can read through and see how each of those are done with the control implementation. So these next sections aren't required, but at the very least, there's something to think about and consider incorporating them into your controls if you're writing them. One is exceptions and deviations. Do you have an exception process if this can't be met for some reason? A lot of controls, you can apply it to 95% of your system, but there are some exceptions. What's the process for those exceptions? How is that documented? Who approves that? You can put that in a section like that. And again, if you're not doing this per control, at the very least, think through what that should look like and how that process should work. All right, this next section, again, not required, but at the very least, think about it. Security plans, security period is very rarely the end goal in our organizations. We're doing something. It's business and we're trying to grow business, or we've got an organizational goal, a mission of the organization that we need to make. We have to keep our focus on that, and security needs to support that mission, not interfere with it. So, a section for each control, at the very least, think about how does each control contribute to the mission. It doesn't interfere with the mission. And then the cost efficiency part, right? If we're spending all of our money on security and not all of our funding on growing the business or advancing the organization or meeting that mission, then we're not doing our jobs. So how is this cost efficient, and how do we keep the mission focus? Consider that for each control. I would highly encourage you to consider including that, though, in the actual text. And then the final section of each control is the documentation and evidence of implementation. What are the documents that go along with this? Where is this described in more detail? Is there an SOP, like we talk about here, standard operating procedure? This has scan reports and that type of thing, so that we can give the evidence that we've met this control to assessors when they come, and we know ourselves this is how this is getting done. It means that it saves us time later on in the process so that we know where all of our information is. So those are the security controls. And that's what the plan looks like. I want to list a few things for how you can use this plan, how you can use this document. Because I think it's easy to look at this and say, ha ha ha, isn't this fun? It's a Star Wars deal. And I'm hoping there's a little bit of that. But there's more to it than just that, right? So one is you can use this as a reference when you're drafting your own security plan. It's one example of what one can look like. And so if you've never written a security plan before, if you've never seen anyone else's, this is something that you can look at and say, huh. Now, you can think it's great. You can think it's terrible. You can, it's too detailed. It's too long. It is too long. It's too long. It's too short. It's too detailed. It's not detailed enough. All of those things, but it gives you something to look at and wrestle with. So that's number one. Secondly, is it gives examples of how a control might be written. And I run into this all the time where there is a control that I read the NIST description and I'm not exactly sure what they're trying to get at. So having one example of how to write that control, what that might look like, can be useful. Again, you can disagree with my perspective on it or ChatGPT's perspective on it. That's fine, but it gives you something to work off of, and you can say, yeah, I disagree with that. I'm going to go do something else instead. Great. The next is you can analyze the fictional security challenges and solutions, right? So if you were responsible for the Death Star, how would you secure it? What would you go about doing that? And then look and see how I've approached it here and make those comparisons. But it's a good learning tool for increasing your capability of planning security in your own environment. All right, using for training purposes, right? So if you're teaching a class, and the class can be anything, whether, formal or informal, it can be you're teaching people how to write security plans. You're teaching people how to implement security in an environment, or read a security plan and then go implement it. You could be teaching a class on assessing a security plan and use this as a tool for your class to go and how would you, if you were going to assess this system, how would you do it? What would you go to verify that the security plan meets the actual implementation? How would you analyze that? What findings would you have for this particular security plan? Right? So any of those things, that's an effective way of using a plan like that. You can use this with discussions with colleagues about good versus bad security, have a great conversation about over documentation versus implementation of security controls, all of that, this can be a good tool for that. I'm hoping that this inspires more of you to go create fictional approaches to technical documents so that you can share them and we can have a broader conversation and make security and ultimately technology more appropriate and effective for our organizations. And then finally, I wanted to highlight how you can use generative AI in in creating a technical document. There's a lot of capability here, and what I'm ultimately hoping is we can get to a place where we're spending a lot more time implementing controls than we are writing about them. The writing is important, but I've never stopped an attacker yet by hitting them over the head with a 500-page security plan. Right? The controls have to be implemented, and focusing on that is the right thing to do. So anyway, take a look at the plan. Let me know what you think. I'm hoping it's valuable for you. I'd love your feedback. I'd love the criticism, thoughts, future direction. Let's have a conversation about it. Thanks.